Let's look into the introduction to production. Now, this is the 16th lesson in microeconomic theory for you. We will have a couple of sessions on this particular theme. So now we are moving away from consumption to production. In the consumption theory, we understood the consumer likes and preferences, and how does he maximize his utility, how does he understand the budget line, and how does he substitute. All of that we studied under the microeconomic theory of consumption. Now we come to another, and that constitutes the demand side of microeconomic theory. Now we shall understand the supply side of microeconomic theory, which is production. We need to understand the producer, we need to understand production processes, we need to understand the cost, and we need to understand the supply side of the economy or the microeconomics. What is the producer's goal? The producer's goal is essentially to maximize profits. That is the ultimate goal of a producer. Just like how a consumer wanted to maximize his or her satisfaction, here a producer wants to maximize his or her profits. Other than that, the producer will also look into maximizing the output with available resources and also try to minimize the cost of production. The question is, why should we study the theory of production? We need to study the supply side, of course, and we need to understand the working of markets. So I had introduced the term markets to you when I spoke about price mechanism, but we had not delved into it fully. But here after this, we shall look into the price, how a price is settled for commodities. So we need to understand the working of markets. We need to understand what are the problems arising in regular business. How do they manage their cost? How do they decide how much to produce? What is the revenue that they get? And what should they expand the business? How much should they expand the business? What is the time during which the business can be expanded? All of these topics will be done under the theory of production. We need also to understand what should be the output, what should be the changes in the level of output, how can these changes be brought about in output, and how can firms expand their size of operation. Now, the theory of production is quite different from the theory of consumption in a different way. In the theory of consumption, usually students are able to relate to the examples directly because they are the consumers in most cases, so they understand that subject well. But when it comes to production, it is a little different from that because the examples that may be there may not be very easily relatable to the day-to-day life of a student. So with the examples that we will give, we will be able to explain the theory of production as well. Now, when you talk about the theory of a firm, there's a difference between firm and industry. Firm is a single unit in an industry. So if we are talking about the automobile industry, then one of those firms, any of those, Maruti for example, becomes a firm. A unit producing that commodity becomes the firm, and the larger industry is that of the automobile sector. Now, the theory of productions constitutes a supply side for price determination. It is also converting the different combination of raw material into outputs. So how does a firm get engaged in this activity of converting inputs into outputs? And what are the constraints that a firm may have? What is the cost of production that it may have? It may want to produce more, whether it can produce more, and what are the choices that it can have about inputs? What are the kinds of inputs, and what are the combinations of inputs that the producer can employ to carry on his production activities? So let us now look at the definitions of production. I have taken two definitions for you. One is that of Hicks and the other given by the OECD. Now, Hicks' definition is very clear. Production is an activity directed to the satisfaction of other people's want through exchange. So there has to be production of goods and services, and these goods and services must be directed at people who use them to satisfy their wants, and this has to happen through exchange. That means there is money incorporated into this whole transaction process. The OECD has a bigger definition, and they talk about the institution which is involved in production. That means it could be a proprietor, it could be a joint stock company, it could be a partnership, it could be a multinational, it could be a government agency. Nevertheless, there is an institution which is engaged in production, and this engagement in production deals with the labor and goods and services, whatever is available, land, labor, capital, all these are put together, and it produces goods and services for the larger society. So that is what we understand as production by OECD, broader definition. Yeah. So let me come to production function. So when we use the term production function, it is a purely technical term, and this technical term understands the relationship which connects the factor inputs and output. That means we have two elements. We have factor inputs that go to make factor output, but they have to be technically decided in what quantities these factors are going to be related to each other. So transformation of factor inputs into products has have to happen at a particular point or a period of time. It cannot be that any time we are talking about. In a given time, what is the relationship between input and output? And it also relates to the technology of the firm that is available in this conversion process at that time. So the production function relates to the inputs and output of the economy at a given time. It includes all technically efficient methods of production. It also says that the highest output quantity Q that a firm can produce for every specified combination of input. So once we combine the various inputs in a certain combination, what is the most maximum that output that can be produced of that particular combination? And the production function is usually written as Q as a function of capital and labor. Let's look into the production process itself. Production process is combination of factors of inputs that are required for the production of one unit of output. So to produce one unit of output, what is the combination of these two goods, the input and output that we require? And a commodity can be produced using different methods of production. Now when we say different methods of production, it can be highly technically a dependent production, it can be a labor dependent production, or it can be a technically neutral production. So but nevertheless, there is a certain kind of a relationship that exists between the two. And theory of production will concentrate only on those production methods which are efficient, which means the producer is interested only in those methods of production which will give him the maximum profit. So any inefficient production, if he adopts, he undergoes a loss. So a producer, a rational producer like a rational consumer, will opt only for those methods of production which will give him the maximum returns or maximum profits. So the choice of the process will depend upon the prices of the inputs. So what are the prices of the inputs? What is its availability? That will decide which of the factors they will be used in the process of production. It also allows the inputs to be combined in various proportions. So output can be produced in many ways. It is not that there's only one way to be produced. Like we discussed in the problem of basic problems of an economy, we can have more labor dependent production processes, we can have more capital dependent production processes. So production functions will actually describe what is technically feasible and how does the firm learn to operate efficiently. These are some of the ideas that are related to production. We can also see what is the role of time in production. Now, when we say role of time in production, there are two important time periods we talk about. One is known as the short run and the other is called as the long run. Now, in the short period, the period of time is small enough where one quantity is possible to change. The quantity of one factor can be changed, whereas the one or more factors can have to be kept constant, which means we can't change all the factors of production. And the factor that can be easily changed in the short run is that of labor. So we may not be able to increase the number of machines or number of computers or number of factories. We may not be able to change it in the short run, but we may be able to change only the factor which is labor. So firms vary the intensity with which they can utilize the plant and machinery. So because in the short run it is not possible to increase the number of plant or machinery, what plants usually do is they can increase the intensity with which the machines and plants are utilized. For example, the plant may go in for a double shift, in which case the same machine can be used for production twice during the day. So that only requires labor to be increased. So labor happens to be that one factor which can be easily increased or changed during the production process in the short run. So all fixed inputs in the short run represent the outcome of long run decisions previously made. So whatever decisions have been made previously, each previous decision now comes back to actual practice in the form of a short run. So whatever decisions have been taken then is now coming as short period, and that is how the firm will be moving ahead. What is the long run? Long run periods are good enough for all the inputs to become variable. That means the period is such that we can change the plant and machinery, we can buy bigger machines, better machines, technologically more efficient machines, larger spaces to work, larger factories to set up. Everything that we talked about as fixed in the short period, we can now actually have them changing in the long period. And these decisions can be very different from the short run, because short run decisions are very limited. There's a very small time within which they have to carry out these operation processes, but long term there is a large time period available, and they can make up all the required changes that they desire. So there is no specific time period to say when it is a short period and when is it long period. We usually say that it should be taken as a case by case for that particular plant, because certain industries long period may be 10 years or 20 years. For certain periods it might be very technologically dependent industries, a short period may be 6 months to 1 year. So these kind of whether short period or long period will depend upon the nature of the industry and the kind of produce that it makes. Now let's also see what are the factors of production. This is also a very introductory topic. Let's just see what are the factors of production. We say that we talk about 4 kinds of factors of production: land, labor, capital, and organization. Land in economics has a different meaning than how we use land in our day-to-day language. Here, land means all resources that are given as free gift of nature, which means all that is found inside the earth, all that is found on the earth, and even above it, the atmosphere, the space, all of them are known as land in economics. Why do we call land? Because these are all free gift of nature, and we say that we can it is limited, because whatever nature has created, that is the size of that particular resource. But for an individual, a person can have more land or less land, but for the economy as a whole, it is given as fixed. The reward for land is rent. The second one is labor. Labor comprises of the education, the knowledge, the skill, attitudes, etc. of people who are available for working in the production process. They get their reward called as wages. We also have capital. Capital is the produced means of production, which means these units can be semi-finished or raw material which are used in the production process. So all those inputs which are used further in the production process are called as capital, and this capital is generally expressed in terms of, the reward is expressed in terms of interest. And the fourth one is called the entrepreneur or the organization. These 3 elements that we just explained cannot be utilized unless there is a fourth factor, which is the entrepreneur. Only when the entrepreneur is organizing these 3 elements can we talk about production. This entrepreneur's role is about efficiency. How can these 3 factors be combined in an efficient manner is the role of an entrepreneur. In an efficient manner, in a creative manner, that is what is the role of this entrepreneur. And let me also highlight to you that the three types of production. We have three kinds of production: the primary produce, the secondary activities, and the tertiary activities. The primary produce depends upon nature, that is agriculture, mining, quarrying. These are called as primary activities because they depend upon land as a resource for carrying out their production activities. They directly depend upon natural resources. The second one is called secondary activities, and these use finished or semi-finished or raw material from the agriculture sector for processing. For example, sugar, cloth, these are secondary sectors because we are using the raw material from the agriculture sector or from the land, and therefore we call them as secondary activities. And the third activity is called as a tertiary sector, where there is no tangible goods that are produced, they are only intangible or services are produced. The production that is done by the teachers, the lawyers, the doctors, the engineers, who are not producing anything tangible, but they are actually people who are providing services because of their knowledge and skill. So when we produce by knowledge and skill by the laborer, we call them as services, and the services of doctors and so on, in which case there is no tangible produce that you can see. And the peculiarity of this is the produce, which is a service that is produced, cannot be stored. It is like a hotel having a hotel room. If the room is not occupied, that day's rent is lost. So you cannot charge the next day person to pay rent for the day that we have lost. Whereas in the case of secondary produce, if the good is not sold today, you can sell that commodity tomorrow. So services are difficult to understand in that sense because they are non-tangible, they differ in quality, and therefore there is a lot of difference that can happen in the prices of these services. So we come to the end of this presentation, and I'm sure that you have been finding the earlier lessons useful to you, and you will share and subscribe this session as well. Thank you.